So you keep making those sorts of comments. Don Garber keeps making comments about trying to save his face, and it always blows up. I pretty much have made a note here that says if Don Garber makes a comment about why something is bad, instantly put down a future bet down on anything going the exact opposite of what he said or proving him completely wrong, because that seems to be the case with him. In a press conference at MLS All Star Weekend, he sat in front of the media and shared thoughts and answered questions on a range of topics, including our record high attendance, revenue, social media engagements, the 2025 Club World Cup, Indianapolis expansion thoughts, tournaments versus South American clubs, and most notably, the US Open Cup yet again. To summarize these thoughts, and I'll get your thoughts on this summary in a second, he claims that it was a group decision between owners, not just him walking in and saying, we're done, which I think we all kind of assumed that was the case. He then doubles down that the decision was made based on schedule concerns, which I also am leaning more towards believing that, but not in the way that he wants us to believe that. So we'll come back to that in a second. He then states that a lot of the clubs claim that they actually wanted to play in the U.S. Open Cup, but by the time that they had made this decision, it was already final and the paperwork was done. So they're reevaluating how that participation can be decided in 2025. He claims that this is kind of where the social media part comes in, and the part that we'll be covering most today, that, there's still a lot of work for the cup to be done because the Atlanta United U.S. Open Cup match in the quarterfinals was played in a big stadium in Atlanta and had 1,400 people there. Now, fact-checking Twitter reminded us that the game was actually played in Kennesaw, which I think was like 25 miles away, not in Atlanta itself, and that they actually had 2,400 people, not 1,400. Take that. He then claims that it doesn't make sense to open a stadium for 1,400 people, which is fair, and then follows up saying that the tournament needs a lot of work to get it to a level that makes sense, which is where these comments backfire on him, kind of. So thoughts just on his overall spiel there?
So I think him saying that it was a group decision with the owners is not surprising at all, considering that teams, even in the past when everybody was participating, just seemed to not really care. I mean, there were probably some that did, but it felt like a lot of the times teams would just send out rotated rosters just to, you know, out of obligation of having to play in the competition. And I'm sure that's, if an owner truly wanted them to try, the team would be out there trying. So I think it wasn't like the most shocking thing to all of a sudden be like, oh, the owners didn't care. I think that kind of showed itself on the field. But I hate the fact they keep doubling down on the schedule congestion thing, because I'm sure there is, a part of that is true. Like the way that everything is currently set up, there's probably too many games in a schedule for teams, especially if they're making deep runs and they're being successful, like a Miami might be. However, I still feel like it's somewhat, at the very least, it's somewhat his own fault that it is a problem, because I think I'd mentioned this in like an episode way back when we had talked about this, maybe originally, but to have two cup competitions along with the regular season and the playoffs is not that much more game. Oh, and CONCACAF Champions League is really not that much more games than what teams in like England are playing in a year. If a team were to make deep runs in all of these competitions, it might be similar to like how many games Man City plays every year, where they make deep runs in a lot of these competitions. It's really not like this excess amount of games all of a sudden where we're playing like 20 more games than anybody else around the world. And clearly all those teams can handle it. They do it every year. Man City makes a deep run every single year. The issue is that the fact that we can't have depth anywhere because we have really tight financial restrictions, which they've been super slow about loosening up on. So he makes the claims of schedule congestion, but at the same time, I feel like part of that is the part of the reason that the schedule congestion is an issue right now is because of things that he has in place and his lack of desire to make those changes. And I'm not saying rip the band-aid off, like no more financial rules, which just reckless abandon spend and an NASL 2.0 kind of thing. But I do think that, there has to be some like accountability on his end for his actions creating this issue. The Atlanta thing, I think we'll talk a little bit about that. probably in a minute, so I don't want to jump too much ahead because I know there's some connection with recent Leagues Cup matches as well. But
Mhm.
obviously, 2,400 people is extremely low attendance, and I think there are some reasons, as you had stated, 25 miles outside of Atlanta, in a completely different stadium from what they normally play in. I don't know if you mentioned it, but I think you might have mentioned it on Twitter. U.S. Open Cup not being a part of the season ticket package, so there's not people who like automatically have tickets already. You kind of have to go out of your way to get tickets to these games. So I'm sure a lot of the culmination of that is why the attendance was so low. But yeah, I mean, 2,400, whether it's 2,400 or 1,400, either way, that's not a good look for that tournament.
Right.
Um,
And that's kind of
uh,
where I was gonna go with that, was this idea that, you know, there are all these people like, oh, like it wasn't 14, it was 24. He can't even get his facts straight. It's like, yeah, that's obviously not great, but it's not a flex. It's not like he was like, oh, they only had 1,400 and they had 14,000. Like those numbers, that's not influential enough to be the sort of flex people tried to make it. Now, that being said, right, there's this idea that the schedule congestion and all that, and you hit it on the head for a good bit of it. But yeah, what I had mentioned was this idea that yeah, there's schedule congestion, and it goes back to kind of our main point that we made originally, was this idea that yeah, there is schedule congestion, and it's made on its own, and it's made on their own, and they've made it difficult, and their answer is to take the one that makes the most money, right? So Atlanta United, who we spoke about a little bit, the Doug Robertson, who is kind of the main Atlanta guy that I follow, he does well reporting on them for AJC, I believe is the paper he writes for. He reported out that there was an announced attendance of 38,000. And anybody who pulled up a picture of that stadium during that game, the stadium holds 70K, and it felt like there was probably five. Now they estimated really probably around 12. But again, first off, 12,000, if that was the number, is six times more than they had at the Open Cup game, right? If it was 38, that means that those tickets were included in the first round of season ticket holders, right? Whatever that may be. Now, what I did is I kind of broke it down and went back into what the Cup US said and about all these new changes. And it financially it was a logical choice, right? You have a cup that if you host on a midweek day with no included season ticket, the US Open Cup, as we said, is not included for most in the season ticket holders, which we said is an easy way to fix that, but they haven't. So we move on. They're not included. So you need to sell those tickets again on a midweek day, usually in a smaller stadium, right? Because they're not expecting to sell out. So they move it to a smaller stadium. They know they're going to get low numbers, and they lose 40% of that revenue to the pot, right? That's what the US Open Cup takes for those teams that host it. Or you can go on the road and make basically nothing. Right. I don't think that there is a cut for the traveling team at the moment. So really you're paying for gas, you're paying the salary, you're doing all this stuff, and you're not getting anything back. Or you can go do Leagues Cup in the middle of the week. And I mean, this was a Friday, so it wasn't even that bad, but middle of the week, included in your season tickets, upcharge your season tickets by the price of one game. So $50 or whatever. Now you've got $38,000, 38,000 tickets at $50 a pop is a heck of a lot of money. I'm not doing that quick math right now, but you're looking at probably half a mil. Is that are my numbers right? 38,000. Then you go by five, and I don't know. I'm too tired to do the math. You're the numbers guy. Do the math while I'm talking.
it's
But
190,000 maybe,
is that really it?
or 1.9 million.
Yeah, I don't know where my no. It's not millions, right? It can't be.
It's 1.9 million. 38,000 times 50.
That's wild, right? So, anyways, that's it doesn't make sense to me. You take that number, and instantly now you're saying, okay, I don't lose any of that to the Leagues Cup because all the sponsors are paying for the big prize pool. So I'm not losing that to league. To my knowledge, by the way, when I did my research, I couldn't find anything that said they lost it. So I may be wrong there, and I'm happy to be corrected if that's the case. You've got 1.9 million in the bank coming in. You could play every single U.S. Open Cup game at home right now with the marketing that you would need to do to bring in the numbers that would do. It would take three tournaments over, right? Like monetarily, it doesn't make sense. And there's always the conversation, the argument against history, and I'm always on board. And I think it was Phil West. Phil West put it out. You can be upset that the history of a tournament is being ruined here, and still understand that Leagues Cup financially makes sense and is a lot of fun. Like you could be on two sides of that, and that's where I am, and I'm assuming that's where you are too, because that's what it is. Is we, the people who have been around know what it means and know why we want it, but we also, in the current state, cannot be upset with the decision that was made from a financial point of view. You can be upset from a historical point of view or a thing like that, but the money just it speaks for itself. So when people come back and fast forward a few days, like, oh, Atlanta, Don Garber said that Atlanta can't pull for an Open Cup game, and then his League Cup game is so small. It's a risk versus reward thing. If you're gonna risk and risk is just the general term, right? If you're going to go and put on an Open Cup game, lose 40% of a revenue of 2,400 people showing up buying, maybe a bag of chips and a hot dog versus the instantaneous, millions that you make from opening one game. Listen, you can be all gung ho, rah rah, whatever, but this isn't the flex you think it is, and I'm going to get into a whole thing later about why I'm over both sides of this argument conversation being the front and center of my social media feed. Like I'm just over it.
Not to mention all that, but I mean, I don't know if we had official numbers yet from US Open Cup. I mean, I'm sure we have, but I feel like at least historically, attendance has been poor across the board, like in almost like every game, unless it's like the final or maybe the semifinal versus Leagues Cup, where yes, the Atlanta game was poor, but I know you had mentioned for the Austin game, there were supporters groups that were supposedly protesting the game. However, despite all that, I think you'd mentioned that the stadium looked like it was very full. I think I saw other people mentioning that as well. Like attendance was very good for Austin. We've seen the tweets about San Jose and them like potentially shattering records for attendance. I don't know what the official number was for that game against Chivas, but like that's not happening at US Open Cup, at least not that I've seen.
No.
So from a business perspective, it totally makes sense why they would go the Leagues Cup route over US Open Cup.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a second, but I do want to just finish up with this Open Cup. Like, what's the path forward, right? Obviously, we want to keep it involved. Obviously, we want to put it in there, but Don Garber made that comment, right? We're looking at to put something together that makes sense for everybody to come back. What is that to you? Like, what would you do if you're in Don Garber's shoes, right? Because he mentioned.
So I guess I have two different things in mind. So like I have the path that I personally would like to see, and then I have the path that if I were in Don Garber's shoes, I'd go. So for me personally, I'd like to just see all of the MLS teams back in there and then just let them have free reign to play whoever they want in the competition. If they want to go ahead and play their MLS next players, I don't really care. Let them go play them. If they want to go substitute and play the bench guys, let them go ahead. If they want to play their starters because they think this is a good shot for them to win silverware this year, by all means, go ahead. But it would be nice to just have them all in there and then give them the freedom to do whatever they like with their team. From a Don Garber perspective, I feel like it makes sense what he's doing because, and I wish I had more concrete facts to back it up, but it just feels like prior to anything that MLS has done this season with US Open Cup, that tournament just kind of like was coasting for a long time without making any upgrades or making any changes for the competition, whether it's the payout, the production, the fields or anything. There just wasn't really any investment in it. It was just kind of like we have the history and we're just kind of coasting on that. And we're just going to put this tournament together every year because we just have historically for 100 years. And now there were finally changes this year, which we had talked about in previous episodes after Don Garber kind of made a stink of everything. So if I'm in Garber's shoes, it's clear you have the power here. So I'm sure he's just going to continue to do what he's been doing because he made an issue out of it and he got some better results from making an issue over it. If he continues that direction, I would only assume that it's going to continue to go his way because I mean, I think the tournament needs MLS teams in it, and he's obviously the head of MLS. I think he has the power in this case. So and again, I want to state that this is not what I want to happen, but if you're going to ask me to be in Don Garber's shoes, I think he's the ball is in No, that's not the right way to say it. I think he kind of holds the cards in this case.
Yeah, no, he does, but for me, it's really easy, and I say this after looking at a couple of teams right now that have done this, and you let them determine what sort of lineup they want to put out, right? You put the power back in the team's hands, saying you want to go for a Champions Cup spot through Open Cup, have at it, my guy. You want to commit to those 6 games? How many 4 games you want to play? Go for it. You think that Leagues Cup is going to bring you more money, better chance, whatever? Commit to that too. Red Bull started Ryan Mera and 16-year-old Julian Hall today or yesterday. I mean, we're already light enough as it is, but quite clearly we are using it as rotation in a trial game, right? Atlanta started Josh Cohen, who was, I mean, dreadful to be quite frank. Stephen Cleveland in Austin, who came up huge in his penalty save, but Brad Stuver sitting on the bench, right? Like this was used by a lot of teams. I don't want to say a lot of teams, but we've only been through the first day or so, 2 days
I think
of
we've only been
this.
through 2 days. Yeah.
Yeah. There are some teams that went out full strength, like San Jose against Chivas. That's a full strength side that I'm looking at right now. So again, they have that opportunity to say, okay, you're going to Leagues Cup. Now, Leagues Cup also has different incentives, right? Like if you get out of the group, at least for last year, you get out of the group in Leagues Cup, it's an instant 100K in your pocket. Every win from then on is another 50. So you have incentives to do that. I don't quite know, and I mean, I probably could do a little bit more research on it, but we don't have the time. It doesn't really feel like the case for US Open Cup. It's more like, okay, what you play, if you get to the end, you get 300. If you're the farthest advancing lower league team, you get 25K, and for each like division. And that's it. Shucks to you, right? So I think it makes a lot of sense just to allow them to make their own decisions, right? Like I can see a sticking point between how much away teams get, because I think that's the other side of it too, is like, oh, if MLS start, because everybody's always like, oh, you want good attendance, put it in the away teams, right? Give it to the lower level teams that are hosting, right? Which is great on paper and stuff like that. But again, if I'm in Don Garber's shoes, that's not money to him. And whether he should or shouldn't want the money, that's another discussion. But that's going to be a sticking point for him, because if he has to travel and pay flights and all this stuff for something that isn't going to work in his favor, that's probably going to be a sticking point for him. Now, I don't see it as a problem because it's not my money, nor is it my team bringing in a ton of cash. But I'm sure he's going to try and do something like 25% of the gate goes to US Open Cup funds, 10% goes to the traveling team, and the rest of it goes to the home. Like, just break into it that way. Now, again, I'll reiterate, that's wrong. Like that's not what this is all about, but that's what I can see happening. What I'd like to happen is just everybody makes their own decision, go back to what we were doing before. What I think is going to happen is they're going to try and argue and fight for some arbitrary percentage of the gate. So it's like, oh, you think you can draw a better crowd, or we're going to take some of that because they're coming to see us, not you, blah, 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 blah. I think it's just stupid, but that's what I can see happening.
Hopefully they don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on board with you. I think that'd be not the right way to go about it. Don't punish the lower league teams because of the federation's inability to generate money for this tournament.
Right. Well, and that's kind of the big overarching picture. I was like, oh, like Don Garber versus the world trying to kill everything. From a straight standpoint of one versus the other, they're two businesses competing against each other, which sucks. Like it's the reason we're in the position we're in, right? They are trying to outdo one another so that they can have control and determine the path forward for American soccer, right? You see MLS expanding a lot into the third division and making MLS Next Pro a bunch of independent sides. And I think in the next 5 years, you're going to have 70 teams in that that league, and that is going to change the whole face of it. While you've got USO who's talking pro rel and talking extra divisions and big expansions and things like that. And it's very, very. It feels like a Best Buy versus Circuit City, like who's going to find the thing to survive the most, right? And again, that's not the way it should be. I'm not saying that I'm enjoying watching this, but it's unfortunately where we're at, and I mean, I don't think you're going to see a side to budge personally, but
this is just like this is every like business in the US. Like
yeah, they teach.
I don't want to dive down the politics
right?
route, but like this is like every company's doing this, just less publicly.
Oh yeah. Like I said, and we brought that up before, right? Like if somebody starts up a new search engine, Google isn't going to be like, okay, we're going to stop suggesting if your top 5 searches are how to cook this and where to buy this and that, we're just going to stop suggesting that to people and anytime somebody puts that into our search engine, we're just going to say, we don't have that answer. Go to ConnorWrightSearches.com and that's how you can find it. Like, that's not going to happen. So
Nah, I mean,
again,
it's like, I mean, to use your example, it's like if like a smaller search engine started, and, they were getting a little bit of momentum, and Google comes in to try to make an offer to bring them in, and they reject it. Google's just going to try to push them out of the market at that point.
well,
Or
and that's exactly what I believe. I've read from a couple of, I don't know if I'd say they're trusted sources, but they're people who claim to have sources that MLS did approach USL to say, hey, let's take you under the umbrella and try and finish this once for all. And USL said no. So again, MLS isn't doing a ton of things right, but if that's true, and again, that's a big if, and USL said no, we're going to do it our way. Well, as much as MLS seems like they're not trying to unite things, USL's putting as much of a roadblock up as anybody else. So again, this is all conjecture, of course. We don't have any of those facts. We're not trying to break news or anything like this. Like, this isn't what this episode is for. It's just us sharing thoughts about how things are going. And speaking of thoughts, we should move on to this whole thing about Leagues Cup attendance. We've been through 2 days. We've seen a couple really good ones, a couple really bad ones. Twitter's going on fire because Atlanta's was really low, but nobody's talking about a packed out Austin or a really nice crowd at LAFC. Seattle turned out 28K. Right? San Jose was, as you mentioned, breaking records. Like, nobody's talking about that, but Atlanta has a small turnout. It's the only thing people want to talk about. Your thoughts?
So I guess there has to be like some grain of salt here, because exactly as we talked about before, if people are just buying season tickets and this is included in there, then it's like, all right, well, I have it. It's like it's so much easier to be like, all right, let's go to the Leagues Cup game where we already have tickets because we bought it already, technically, versus US Open Cup where you got to go out of your way to go get tickets to the game. I think attendance, like, just naturally is going to be higher for Leagues Cup versus US Open Cup. But at the same time, I do think that there is a huge portion of this, of attendance, that is being driven by the League MX clubs, that the USL teams and any other lower league American teams are just not going to be able to draw. Like, I don't think San Jose Chivas is breaking records because everybody wants to go see San Jose. I think they're breaking records because tons of people want to go see Chivas, and they have an opportunity to do so because they're playing against San Jose versus normally having to go all the way down to Mexico or in Guadalajara. I'm just guessing that's where they play. They may not actually play in Guadalajara, but they have somewhere much closer that they can go see them play versus having to go, like, travel to a whole other country to watch them play. So that poll is not going to come from USL or lower league American teams like it does from League MX teams. So I think the attendance is, there's a part of it that's like, all right, we already have tickets for it, let's go see them, which is boosting the attendance numbers. And then I think there's a big part of it too that's tons of people that are League MX fans in the US that are like, here's my opportunity to go see this team play. So I think both of those things combined are driving the attendance numbers up. And I don't think we should harp on things like one-off situations in Atlanta when you have a lot of other situations that are doing very well with attendance. And one thing I do want to add, and I don't know for sure if this had any impact on the attendance in Atlanta, but I've been kind of lingering around the Atlanta subreddit a little bit. And I know there have been a lot of people complaining about season ticket prices because it is very expensive compared to what the average income is in Atlanta. And so I don't know if that had any impact on people potentially protesting on that as opposed to specifically protesting against Leagues Cup.
Mm-hmm.
It may not have had any impact, and maybe people just didn't want to go to the game at all. But that may have played some factor in people not showing up to that game. But I haven't seen anybody say anything about that, so I don't know for sure if that's a fact. I just know that people have been talking about season ticket prices in the Reddit.
Yeah. Well, with this whole thing, and this is going to get into my last point here, but it's U.S. Open Cup, Leagues Cup, and I think we even said this back when it first started, was it's very, very similar in this sense, where there are some areas that just love the U.S. Open Cup, right? I think of Vermont as that example, right? I remember when Vermont played Lexington and they packed 4K out for their USL2 team. Like, it was great. But then there are others, and most of them at USL Cup in the early rounds were really scarce, right? They showed up a couple hundred people at best, right? And it's the same thing as Leagues Cup. There are some. St. Louis was barren because they weren't happy with what was going on, and they did a great job doing whatever they planned, and it worked for them. Atlanta was barren, right? Like they were empty, no doubt about it. But at the same time, Austin was really strong. Seattle was felt empty because they were playing in the football stadium, but they still packed 30K out, right? And again, that's the thing. I think Seattle had 3,000 at their U.S. Open Cup match in the quarterfinals. I mean, it's literally it's apparently millions of dollars as we do the calculation here. Um, there are just places where they'll take in anything or they'll take in nothing, right? And be it from boycotts, lack of understanding, whatever it may be, right? Like my pops didn't know what was going on with Leagues Cup, right? He doesn't know what they're doing, but he was giving me updates as I was driving home from training last night. He's like, oh, Dylan Nealis is coming in the midfield a lot. We're looking really sloppy, all this stuff. He's talking me through it, and no idea the Leagues Cup is going on, but he's watching the game, right? And you just have people who will tune in for things like that. And I think you made a good point about the majority of the good ones, the good involved the League MX team. And again, that's probably why they trended more towards it because they know they can reach that demographic better than the US Open Cup one. But my annoyance comes with this constantly online group that will focus on small sample size and use it as gospel truth. And there's a big overlap on a lot of things that fall into this category, but won't go down that. But if US Open Cup has one good crowd, it's shared all over the place, and it's like the cup is massive, and it's growing to be the biggest thing in the world, and screw Don Garber, blah blah blah. But they won't mention the other 10 games where it had a couple hundred people, right? Or if they do, it's with excuses. And be it as it may, like I don't really care why. You could say it's because they didn't promote it. They didn't have it at the stadium. They didn't do this. Sure, right? Whatever. Leagues Cup has 2 bad attendances, and those attendances are still, if you compared them, I bet you they'd still be really high US Open Cup showing for most teams. It's shared as why the tournament's dying and should be banned tomorrow. But good attendance comes around in Austin, place like that, and it's relatively quiet. And I'm not doing this as US Open Cup needs to die and League Cup. It's all over the place where I'm just the constant gotcha takes basically are just really, really getting to me, and I'm really tired of it. And it goes not just on Twitter, but all the way up to, and I'll call Don Garber out for this too, right? Don Garber going into his press conference like, "Oh, look at Atlanta, 1,400 people in their stadium. That's why we can't do U.S. Open Cup right now." LAFC playing against New Mexico had a full supporters section, a full secondary section, and New Mexico traveled like 3K to the game. They had a whole section to themselves, but he never mentions any of that. It's really, really frustrating to have any sort of conversation regarding what U.S. Open Cup here right now and Leagues Cup. But I mean, it's really any soccer because people will buy onto something that is emotional, like the U.S. Open Cup history, and they will just do anything they can to pick and choose why things are good or things are bad. Like the narrative washing on both sides, and like I said, it starts all the way up with Don Garber making his dumbass comments, right? It's just really annoying because nobody can actually get a proper analysis because you're going onto Twitter and it's filled with Don Garber said Atlanta was bad at pulling U.S. Open Cup and they can't pull up for League Cup. Ha 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 ha. And then everybody thinks one thing without actually doing any actual research. It's exhausting and tiring, and it's I don't want to say it's like holding the game back, but it's just a silly narrative that nobody ever wins from. And I'm just tired.
Well, let me give you the bright side of looking at all of this. I'd say probably easily over 50% of fans have no idea about any of this back and forth garbage, and that they're just like your dad. They see a game on, they want to watch, or they see their teams playing locally or whatever, and they get tickets to go see the game because they have the free time on a Saturday and they just want to go have a good time. And so I think majority of people don't have to be exposed to this like we do, obviously, because we are in the weeds of it for the podcast and just for our enjoyment of the league itself. But majority of people are not going through this, which I'm grateful for. I'm grateful they don't have to deal with that because, like you said, it's just on both sides. It's just really dumb. It feels very childish. It's tiring. It's exhausting. But it's just it's honestly never going to end. Like they'll go back and forth till the day they die. I think, like we've talked about plenty of times, if people have a grudge against MLS, they will forever have a grudge against MLS. It doesn't matter what they do. Doesn't matter if they introduce Pro tomorrow and eliminate all the financial restrictions. It will always be something else. And the same. It seems like honestly the same thing the other way too. Like
Oh yeah.
there's no reason for Don to be making comments like you said, when you're not going to like properly give credit to the teams in USOC who are pulling very good attendances.
Yeah, and that's a frustrating part is like you've got people who are like really well followed blue check mark having accounts that are just jumping on it because it's getting clicks. And I'm not talking about the ones that we usually interact with, but like the random like soccer like just repost anything soccer related. We'll find the general trend and just get on it. And like that is bringing in a whole other crop of like people who just aren't able to find the true answer, and the true answer is that some of them is good and some of them is bad. Like that's just really the end of it. And you can compare both, but at the end of the day, it all, to me, and again, maybe that's just a personal thing, it all stems back to how much money it's going to make. And as much as we love the history of it, it makes sense because you've got that same crowd who, one, is either saying, well, MLS needs to get better or I won't watch. And if you're not doing that and you're not making money, you can't get better. Or two, they're the same people who at this point in the year would be saying, oh, MLS is too boring for me to watch. Summer MLS is so boring. I can't watch it. It's blah, 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 blah. Right. There's always an excuse for it. And now they're just directing it somewhere else. I'm not saying that's everybody, of course, but we've been through this long enough where it's just frustrating. And that's my vent for the day on soccer Twitter and its exhausting nature.
Oh yeah, it is exhausting being on soccer Twitter, whether it's MLS related or USMNT related. It's a cesspool. But I mean that's just Twitter in general
Yeah,
now.
it's
It's
all
just a
got it's all
dumpster
gotcha
fire.
moments and oh, look at this one thing that sticks to my my
Your bubble.
guns. Yeah, look, this proves my point, which means I'm going to take it as the gospel truth. And if you show me something else, it doesn't count. Well, that's not how you find true answers to anything. Like that's not data analysis. That's bias. And again, we're not out here advocating for one over the other. We want both of them in there. We've said that multiple times, but I mean, it's time to be realistic about things and understand like why things are taking place and then how to approach things properly. So, you know, be it as it may.